Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on the convergence of strategy, risk, and technology. Thank you all for joining us. I'm joined by three excellent speakers today. Alex Sidorenko, CEO of Risk Academy, Bob Bowman, Chief Risk Officer of the Wendy's Company, and Quinn J. Rodriguez, VP Strategy and Innovation at Risk Connect. I'm going to come around to everybody and ask them to tell them a little bit about their roles and their perspective on this, but just a reminder that we will be taking questions. Feel free to put them in the chat and I will put them to our panelists. We had a lot in advance when people signed up, which is great, so I'll also ask some of those too. And with that, we will kick on. Alex, I'm going to come to you first. Can you just tell us a little bit about your role, your experience, what perspective you're bringing?
Sure. So my day-to-day job is the head of risk and insurance of a mining company, and we have an asset in Brazil, and we produce rare earth, which until recently nobody heard about, but then Trump made it popular, so thank you for that. And Risk Academy is really just a hobby of mine, a platform where I try to share risk knowledge and kind of bring different risk speakers together to talk during the Risk Awareness Week. So that's my experience.
Lovely. Bob, coming around to you, tell us a little bit about your role and your...
Yeah, thanks very much, Sarah, and happy to be a part of this today. I've been in the industry probably just over 30 years, started in the US with a traditional P&C carrier, then moved into the risk management side with a large US retailer by the name of Macy's. And then about 10, 11 years ago, I moved over to Wendy's, a US-based restaurant company where I'm now the Chief Risk, Ethics, and Compliance Officer.
Lovely. Quinn, your turn. Tell us a little bit about you, your role, your perspective. You are
Absolutely. Thank you for having me and inviting me. I appreciate it. I'm amongst great minds, so please bear with me as we go through this call. I'm with Risk Connect. I'm part of the strategy and innovation team. I work with organizations like Wendy's and others around their strategic and risk journey. We know that's a challenge through these times. And we look at ways of improving and enhancing organizations' ability to manage risk across the enterprise. We look at the insurable side, as Alex had talked about, as the risk insured side, as well as the uninsurable side, which is your governance, risk, compliance, ESG, and every other acronym that I think we've added to the back of that in the risk space. So I have the pleasure of working with Bob and other organizations on their journeys and experiencing their growth through that process. So thank you for having me on.
Great, thank you. Bob, I'm going to come to you first for the next question. So, in the synopsis, we talked about risk management being the cornerstone of strategic leadership. What do we mean by that? And how do you think that risk managers should be thinking about their role in terms of business management, decision making, using technology to improve those things, etc.?
Yeah, Sarah, thanks very much for the question. It's a great question. And if you think about it, literally and figuratively, if you are the cornerstone, well, it's also a weighty question then, right? But I think, what the question means or infers for me is that there is opportunity. There's opportunity for insight. There's opportunity for input, and there's opportunity for impact, which is probably the most important. There's potential for risk management to make meaningful contributions toward achievement of goals, long-range priorities. I think to capitalize on the opportunity, it's important for risk management professionals to distinguish and to know sort of where we are, right? We have the opportunity, if and as we earn that cornerstone position, to be a part of both strategy and tactics, or strategic risk management and tactical risk management. It's really important to understand which of those you're participating in at the time. Strategy, lots of definitions for strategy, right? But probably most involves something around a plan that considers your purpose, your priorities, resources and capabilities that you have, and it probably has a longer range horizon. There's a bit of aspiration, right? You're trying to keep all that aligned with your organizational mission. Your tactics, on the other hand, those are sort of the action items or the incremental actions that you're taking to bring that strategy to life. Strategic risk management, on the one hand, is on and over the horizon. It is where we have the opportunity to shift from tactical and traditional, which generally tends to rely on our history, more toward and more participating in our future, where we might go, what we might become, and all of the uncertainty that surrounds that.
Lovely. Quinn, coming to you next with the same question.
Yeah, Bob summed it up really well, and I think the role in the cornerstone of that, the leadership is shifting from more of a compliance enforcer to being more of a strategic advisor, allowing the boards and the executive leadership team to make more forward-thinking, more informed decisions when they are looking at balancing the risks with the opportunities. And that's where that strategic advisor comes in to allow them to be more, I think, proactive than reactive in those decisions that those boards and those leadership teams are making. So I think it's evolving. I hope that we continue to see that shift away from just being a compliance officer to being more of a strategic advisor, as Bob had highlighted.
That makes sense. Alex, what do you think? Are you a strategic advisor? What should be the role of the risk manager when it comes to business decision making and leadership, etc.? Where does the risk role?
In the spirit of debate and just for the sake of making it fun, I will play the role of a bad cop just for this question, but maybe for all questions. Accounting disciplines, finance disciplines, corporate finance, all the management and marketing and operational and finance cornerstones of how organizations operate today are built on the premise that the world is deterministic. If you look at your financial statements, single values. If you look at your business plans, single values. If you look at your forecasts, single scenario. This is so fundamentally flawed that the question is not whether the risk manager is a strategic advisor. It is criminal to continue to plan, budget, forecast the way companies do today. I mean, the shareholder value that is left on the table or lost or ignored because businesses plan based on averages rather than on ranges of possible scenarios and appreciate the kind of the volatility of the assumptions. So in my mind, risk manager is not an advisor. It's the necessity without which you cannot operate in true honesty and in fulfilling your governance or regulatory obligations to the shareholders. So in my mind, and I wish it was different, but it looks like we have kind of this short straw who have to bring stochastic back into the conversation for the planning business business decision making and maintenance forecasting, budgeting, anything you can think of that has to do with the future is actually volatile. It's not a single scenario. And yet everybody pretends that company valuations are a single scenario, budgets are a single scenario, business NPVs are a single scenario. That is just mathematical nonsense. And if not us, then who else? I wish finance professionals and accounting professionals and corporate finance professionals and strategy professionals kind of did it themselves. But it looks like we have to kind of bear this uncertainty, risk, probability burden on our shoulders. So that's my very artificially conflated alternative point of view.
I'm going to come back on it and ask you a question. Okay, so what should the model look like if it was working properly and businesses were making decisions based on uncertainty ranges? What would the role of the risk manager look like in that scenario? What should the role of the CRO or the risk manager or whomever we're talking about be in that decision-making process?
Yeah, we don't know what it should look like for sure, but our hypothesis is that it should look like something like a decision support, where just like you ask a tax department to give you feedback on what the different tax implications are, you ask the risk department to give you feedback and input and calculations on what the uncertainty impact is on decisions. So for example, if the the board or the executive ask to make a choice between 3 or 5 different configurations, they have to be compared not only in terms of their dollar value, but also in terms of the risk exposure that they bring. So it's always kind of a trade-off between how much value we want to generate versus how much risk we're willing to take. So every business plan is a distribution. Every decision is a kind of comparison of distributions. Every budget is a distribution from which you can derive your contingency. That's the current hypothesis. I mean, it may be proven completely wrong in the future, but at the moment, it seems to outperform the traditional ERM view by miles. So I think it's safe to say that I think that's kind of the next evolution of risk management, at least in my mind.
So we've talked a little bit about what we think leadership looks like and what we think the risk manager role is. What's the role of technology? Where does that come into this?
Well, that's a good point. It really depends upon the level of maturity. In Alex's case right there, I think you're going to become a master of scenario modeling, right? You're going to be running constant models for the leadership team, if this, then that type modeling. So you're going to shift away and using those values of risk management. That's a lot of information, especially when we start seeing technology rolling into the insurable world, Bob, right? And bringing in those values of post events that have a huge impact on an organization and a huge impact on a leadership and a board's decision to move forward. That's a lot of information that needs to be correlated and analyzed, and then squeezed and then put into a scenario that says, okay, Alex, if you're going to do this, then we're gonna have to succeed on this and give you that decision making process. So it's as we see more scenario modeling and more testing of the data, and the cleaner the data is getting, I think technology is going to be a need. I'm pretty sure we will use that acronym coming up here in a little bit, the AI and the power of that. But as we see that shift, that information is going to be critical. And that data just can't be done in spreadsheets anymore. It doesn't have the capacity to do that.
Well, what's your view on the technology question, and specifically, how does technology improve strategic decision making? How does it help risk managers in that role you kind of talked about as a strategic advisor? And do you have any examples from within your own organization of how you're using technology to kind of improve the risk management process?
Yeah, absolutely. And Alex, I'm actually, even though you identified yourself as the bad cop, frankly, I'm in agreement with you in many respects. And I think as it relates to technology, right, the continuum that we're all attempting to complete is data to information to actionable insights. And to Alex's point, the actionable insight is probably never with 100% certainty, this is the outcome. It is more like with much in the way of dynamic and variable, and to Alex's earlier point, uncertainty, the very essence of risk, we create a reasonable range, a foreseeable range, and technology really enables us to do that. I think in prior technological generations, that was largely based on history, right? We just compiled data, historical data, initially our own. And then we became willing and able to expand the data sets and gain a larger perspective. And now, with the probabilistic, with the predictive, with big data, with analytics, we not only shift and expand the scope further, but we begin to bring, Quinn mentioned this earlier, the future into the equation. And instead of telling you about the weather yesterday, you'd probably actually rather inform tomorrow's activities by knowing and understanding what the weather is going to be tomorrow with a high degree of certainty. So you know whether to take the umbrella, the winter coat, or the shorts. That is risk management, right? That I just walked you through the range of possibilities for tomorrow. And then in terms of, well, how do we make that practical? Well, old school, right? Around for a long time, predictive analytics. Take a bunch of disparate data elements, bring them together, and what does that mean for, we use predictive analytics relative to claims management to a certain extent. what does all of that mean relative to the future of this claim? Again, probabilistic, it may not happen exactly this way, but many of these things that are somewhat uncertain all combine to bring about a certain outcome. We can also use that relative to risk transfer, right? And I would imagine Alex can elaborate on this. When we talk about risk transfer, I can remember when I came into the industry and we talked to our C-suite leaders. When we talked insurance, it was just make sure we have enough. No, make sure we have more than enough. And that was it. But if you think about optimizing shareholder return, optimizing organizational value, preserving that value as well, what if I could use predictive and probabilistic analysis not to determine what's more than enough? Well, I guess that's it because we've never exceeded it. What if I could determine, no, what's the reasonable range of risk relative to this? If I can quantify it, if I can then qualify it, now I can make an informed decision about it. Now I'm participating in that strategic discussion.
Makes sense. Alex, what's your take?
Yeah, I fully agree. I'll just pick up on the insurance example that Bob made. We had two very interesting situations where quantification kind of helped cement the decision, which was counterintuitive most of the time. Once we did the calculation of what was our underlying risk profile, and we found out that rail car insurance, and we had a big rail car fleet, rail car insurance actually was not economically justified. So we retained full risk and we stopped the insurance because it just didn't make sense. We had a lot of data points from both our company and from the whole industry in the country, and calculated it a few different ways. Basically, the conclusion was just don't do it. Waste of time, waste of money. And it was very counterintuitive for the team responsible for this because they relied on the insurance as the maintenance budget, and were overpaying through the roof because insurance is not is a very pricey product. And the second case was when we were insuring our marine cargo. Again, huge volume going all over the world. We found that first of all, based on our risk profile and based on the data that we got from the brokers and from the underwriters, we were, even when we got the best quotes, we were still overpaying, I think, 300 or 400%. So insurance it's not a cheap product. You have to realize that it's a product specifically designed for protecting the tail, the catastrophic risks. You don't use it as kind of full risk protection. And what we found based on our calculation was that if we increase the deductible from 30,000, which we had, to 100,000, we would actually save more on premium 72% of the time than the additional risk that we would get. However, if we increase the deductible from 300,000 to 500,000, we would only be better off 51% of the time. Which again, you can argue that you should go all the way to 500, but our CFO kind of didn't feel comfortable there. He felt comfortable going from 30 to 100, like, or what did I say? From 30 to 100 and from 100 to 500, sorry, I misspoke. So he had no issue going from to 100 because it was just, it's a no-brainer. 72% of the time you are saving more money than you're losing. Because of the increased deductible, because of the more retained risk. So these are just some examples where proper risk quantification helps you move from kind of intuitive gut feel type decisions to very simple calculations where you go, this option and outweighs this option in terms of risk and value. So I think that's insurance is the good starting point to generate very real, tangible cash value from risk-based decision making, and then you kind of move into more long-term decisions that don't have this immediate payoff. Because with insurance, the payoff is immediate. You spend a month modeling your marine cargo, and then you suddenly save $3 million from previous year to this year with the same, with the same limits and same deductibles. So it's a no-brainer on insurance.
Thank you. Someone in the Q&A asked if this was live or pre-recorded. It's live. Please feel free to ask questions in there. I will put them to the panelists. Quinn, okay, so we've talked a bit about predictive analytics, etc. What other tools and technology do you think that risk managers should be thinking about? And I'm also just to you going to weave in a question that somebody asked when they signed up, which was, hang on, let me find it. What are the must-have features of a top-performing risk management tool? And I guess to a certain degree, it depends what kind of tool you're talking about, but I would be interested in your view on that while we talk about other sorts of technologies or tools that people should be considering.
Yeah, that is a great question, and I would probably throw that back, define what risk management is to you, because we've hit a lot of areas. We talked about the insurable side and that risk management information systems. You'd obviously have different requirements than if you were talking about an enterprise risk management system or an operational risk management system. But as we look at some of the things that Alex was just talking about, you hit on some really, really interesting points. The risk quantification piece excites me a lot about the future of risk management and how do we start creating value to risk, and how do we move from value driven insurable risks, as you're right, it's a coverage or it's not a coverage, to what is the potential impact, what is the velocity of a risk, and how do we create a value for that, so we could take that back to the leadership team and saying, hey, if we take this risk assessment that I perform, here's the impact that it's going to have financially on us. So that quantification is extremely valuable. Getting to those values is the challenge, right? And that's what we're trying to figure out. How do we leverage technology to create those values? And that comes through that data modeling that Bob was talking about, it using the AI capable tools that allow us to create a value of potential risks and future risks that we see. The one thing that we focus on a lot in the technology side is, how do we create more value with what you have today? So sitting down with CROs like Bob, if I have a RIMA system, how can I extract information, or how can I correlate that type of an impact of a risk that sits in that system and get it over to my strategic risk, so I can explain it to my leadership team. If we drive this value down, it would have an impact on our reputation, it would have an impact on our safety programs, it would have an impact on our operational exposures. So there's a lot of areas of risk that we think we could extract that data, get it into a more of an analytics tool that Alex had mentioned, getting it into the analytics tool and start to quantify that. We can have a huge impact on organizations. So the areas that I would talk about, and Bob and I've had this conversation, is definitely an enterprise risk management system, so you know what your risks are. If you're capturing your top 10, top 20, top 50, it's always nice to know where you stand as an organization. And then starting to branch out if it's an insurable side, knowing what those biggest impacts that have on that operational or that enterprise risk side. So it really depends upon that and where you're going around your risk program and where you are in the level of maturity.
Thank you.
I'm sure Bob has something to add to that.
Yeah, I was going to come to you, Bob. Either in just response to what Quinn said, or just broadening into what other technologies do you think that risk managers should be thinking about to kind of play this role that we're talking about, where they're reducing uncertainty and improving business outcomes, etc., at that proper board level?
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And Quinn, thanks for sort of laying the foundation, right? So I think as I was listening to Quinn's response, it comes to mind that when I joined my current organization, at the time, if you will, the visionary perspective that seemed to be out in the market was an integrated risk management perspective. And that was the journey at that sort of moment or phase or point in time. Let's take the elements of traditional, generally insurable risk management, and let's begin to bring them together and lever them for value. And now we've rapidly moved to, we refer to it as GRC most commonly. I might refer to it sort of outward, inward, CGR, right? And now it's integrated governance, risk, and compliance. Or if we look at it from the external to the internal, integrated compliance governance, and risk. What does the world impose upon us? What do we then impose upon ourselves? What's left over that's uncertain, whether it's regulated or whether we're governing it electively. And it is that much more broad quest now that we're really trying to bring together and integrate. And what that does, and we see it fairly often. So now we've got disparate data. Now we've got data that many of us have never even attempted to relate, let alone to correlate, let alone to use for decision making or to inform decision making. And it's, you know, it's really interesting when you bring apparently radically different or disparate data sources together that you believed had no relationship, what might quickly be revealed and how that might be superior information, superior insight that I think Alex referenced this previously. Oh, we'd never thought of that, or we'd never thought of it like that, or we'd never thought that the left and the right might possibly have any relationship to one another, let alone that we might be able to foresee how they might pair or how many might pair together and how that changes our perspective relative to risk.
Alex, I'm going to come to you not quite with the same question, well, with the same question, but with a prompt that I want you to speak specifically about AI and the role that it is going to play in improving risk management processes and decision making, etc.
Thank you. My favorite topic.
Well,
No, genuinely. You know, a few years ago, I was kind of sitting there and going like, what's happening in risk management? It's stagnating. We've been, you know, me and a few other individuals have been kind of fighting for quantitative risk management for over 15 years. And reality is like there's no fundamental shift in the market. The risk professionals are still as illiterate in terms of quantitative risk analysis as they were, you know, 15 years ago. And I was kind of sitting there and waiting, going like, what's going to be the next innovation? Like, is there a chance to save the profession? What's going to happen? And then AI happened, you know, Gen AI. I think this should be really viewed by every risk manager as an amazing kind of once in a lifetime opportunity enabler, because it now allows risk managers to do all sorts of things that, you know, I had math PhDs do in the past through a simple conversation, because models are now so advanced that you can talk to them, like you can describe to them the business decision or the business challenge that you're trying to solve, and then it will reason itself to find the appropriate mathematical test to deal with that. And then it will use its language model to write the code in Python to program a tool to actually go ahead and execute that calculation. So you can load all sorts of Excel, PDF files into LLMs, and they will spit out, you know, pretty good analysis back at you. Something that would normally take highly kind of skilled quantitative people to do, and something that would normally take weeks to do now can be done in hours. It's not error-free. In fact, every single calculation I do, like every single Monte Carlo or something I do in ChatGPT, comes up with at least one error. But the reality is that's probably 3 errors less than my, you know, math PhDs came up with. So it's not difficult outperforming, you know, human risk managers, to be honest. And I think this is a huge enabler for all of us. We can, like, anybody who's listening to us, you can think of your risk management tasks that you're doing today, or your insurance tasks for that matter. Like whatever you're doing today can be done faster and probably more effectively with AI, with some, you know, pre-planning and some you know, kind of prompt or system instruction design. We live in an amazing time. I think this technology is really going to improve the risk profession, because we can now finally spend more time talking to all the other departments, convincing them that they should integrate volatility and uncertainty into their decisions, into their plans. And then we can get, you know, AI to kind of to handle the calculations, because in the past, it would take weeks. You get the financial model from another department, and then it would take weeks to actually run the simulations. Now it's much quicker. And it's not even just AI. Sam Savage from Stanford came up with this free, and a few other gentlemen came up with this free standard, which is basically like the new language for communicating risk information, called SIPMath standard. And this new language allows us to convert literally any business plan or any budget or any CapEx estimate into a stochastic model. Within the same you take the existing file, wherever that file is, and you can turn it into a stochastic, risk-based file, which I think is, again, an amazing enablement for the risk profession.
Ben, do you have a perspective on AI and the role that it will play in risk management, in business decision making, etc.?
Yeah, I think it's you're either using it or you're going to get left behind, right? And that's what I think everybody's alluding to. And I couldn't say it any more passionate than Alex already has around the impact it's going to have on risk management. And it hits on what Bob had brought up earlier, is having that view out on the horizon. Think about all the data points that our REMIS system is capturing. Think about all the data points that an integrated risk management system that Bob had alluded to earlier, all those data points, and if you could put those in a model that allows you to take that uncertainty away that Alex had mentioned, and plug that up and saying, look, here's the likelihood of something going to happen is much greater now that we have good data and we're loading those AI models. I think it's just going to shift the focus from being a control tester or being an analyst to now looking at the data models, running scenarios, and providing better outcomes based on that information that you're getting. And the hardest part, I think, is organizations, I should say the hardest part, is how do we embrace it quickly, right? We love it. I think we all use it on this call. But the organizations and the security teams are sitting back going, okay, what are the impacts to our organization? I know the legal office is trying to figure this out as well. And how do we protect our organization? How do we keep from making a mistake or allowing AI to make a mistake that we're responsible for and it has an impact on our reputation? That's where I think a lot of people are trying to figure out, how do we protect ourselves but leverage the power of AI? And that's where we're trying to help organizations. Look, you got to embrace it. You got to have some systems and control that say you understand. You do have control of the data models. You do have controls in place to manage the use of that AI tool. But it's coming. You just got to figure out how best to embrace it, where best that it can be utilized in the organization, and how can you get to those confident points of information that are coming out of it. Alex is right. It's going to be wrong, but it's going to be wrong less. And I totally agree with that concept. And then you're just going to be validating that information. It's critical. So, we're looking forward to it. We're excited about it. And I think we're starting to see more and more organizations embrace it once they got the governance and compliance on the utilization of those tools.
Cool. I'm going to come to you, Bob, but I'm also going to weave in some questions. We've had a lot of questions from the audience, both in terms of AI specifically and in some of the pre-questions that we were given when people signed up. So the kinds of things that people are bringing up when we talk about AI is how are people thinking about the risks that it creates? So somebody has just asked, how are the panel looking at and measuring AI risk exposure for corporates that face and interact with the public? Are risk managers getting a seat at the AI strategy table? So that's about, I think, some of the risks that it's creating. Other questions we had in advance were about imperfect data and the concerns around AI, using data pools that are perhaps not accurate and then putting out bad stuff. So I think that, I think people are excited by AI, but concerned about it. So when you give your perspective on AI and the role that it will play, can you also address some of those kind of concerns about some of the fear that surrounds it from a risk perspective?
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting question or questions to dive into, right? Because think about this. So we've got a group of risk management professionals convened, and many of those risk management professionals have fear, anxiety about what? Uncertainty. AI is in some ways unknown, in some ways unfamiliar, and in some ways, as it's emerging, less predictable. But what are our roles? Where did we all grow up? We recognize this path. We recognize this journey. To a point Alex made earlier, the challenge now is to wrestle with the technology in order to cause it to become more credible, more reliable, more predictable, in order to reduce the errors and improve the quality of the output. I think in a way oversimplified manner, part of the quest that we might be on, whether it's AI or whether it's some of the tools that existed long before AI was a term, predictable results make what's desirable possible. If you think about it, what stands between you and your vision, what stands between you and bringing that long-range strategic outcome to life is predictability. To Alex's point, trying to hit the bullseye every time, a single number, something deterministic, is seldom right. We talk about error, we talk about mistakes, whatever it may be. Think about how many times a deterministic outcome, I would argue the statistical majority, didn't exactly go that way, right? We never hit the number. Why? Because there are many variables in play. So, I think it's using these tools, whether it's the stochastic or probabilistic or whatever it may be, to bring about predictability. Predictability there again, not in terms of the bullseye, but in terms of the reasonable and foreseeable range that recognizes the dynamic nature of what you're dealing with, that applies some control to that dynamic environment, and that really brings about the fuel for your risk appetite, for innovation, and that allows you, if I know the range reasonably is between X and Y, then if you get it closer to X, I'm going to do this. And if you get it closer to Y, I'm going to do that. But either way, I'm equipped to deal with the logical outcomes.
Thank you.
Can I just just comment on that? Because Bob, this is the best answer I've heard in my life. Like this, you just
I stole
summarized
it from Quinn.
so well and so concisely. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Alex, I know you sort of answered this question live, but I'm actually going to put, like, you typed a response to it, but I'm actually going to put it to you live because I think it would be worth a bit more explanation, and I'll throw it around to anybody else who wants it as well. But so somebody asked, they start by talking about BBC podcasts and risk management, which sounds interesting, but it says they question the use of risk quantification and how difficult and sometimes dangerous it is to use likelihood in trying to understand risk. One, because most people don't understand those statistical measures, probably true, and what they mean. And two, because they often prove false because the future regularly goes in different directions. Perhaps another lens would be to look at how much action is needed to manage a risk in relation to its impact, rather than just thinking about likelihood and impact, and then a link to the podcast. And you responded that it's criminal negligence, but can you just give a slightly more full answer to that question, and what, why people should be thinking about quantification and just where you think that kind of,
I'll try and kind of make it into an analogy. Horses are better than walking, and cars are better than horses, and planes are better than cars. Your objective is to get from Europe to US, and you have these three options. Walking, horses, car, and the plane. And the same with kind of different types of risk analysis. You have your gut feel and your rules of thumbs, grandmother's kind of stories that pass from generations, and they work some of the time. And then you have the likelihood impact type methodologies, and they are designed to kind of improve on the gut feel. And then you have plenty of research where different organizations like NASA and a lot of scientists in the agricultural space and in IT space and in project space have compared the quantitative measures to your typical likelihood consequence type methodologies, and they outperform, most of the time, if not all the time, in terms of getting to your objective quicker. And then you have, planes, people like Nassim Taleb saying that your basic kind of quantitative normal distribution VAR type methodology outperforms your gut feel and outperforms your heat map, but it still significantly underscores the tail risk. And in fact, instead of normal distribution, you should be using power law, and you have to have worst case scenario protection for the risk of ruin. So there are kind of evolutions of thinking, and on that spectrum of evolutions of thinking, there are very clear losers. So there are very clear methods that have produced nothing but disappointment, and they have been, I think, hopefully beyond any reasonable doubt, scientifically proven to create more error than positive. In fact, you're literally better off not doing a risk analysis at all if you're doing, a heat map, and that I think is the level of maturity where we as risk professionals really should be in 2025. I mean, this research dates back to 80s, and it's been written in multiple books in 2009. So really, there's no excuse for the risk professionals to kind of still stick to the old paradigm. So I haven't listened to the podcast. I will listen to it with interest. But it's important to kind of, I bet the conclusion is not what the question was asking. The conclusion is something different, is something more intricate. Because, for example, people quote Taleb is going after banking risk management. And by the way, banking risk management is way more sophisticated than kind of non-banking risk management. And so Taleb is going after banking risk management, exposing all of their methodology limitations. And he's absolutely right. But what he's saying is that the alternative to bad risk models is not modeling. It's better risk models. He's saying their models are not sophisticated enough. So the answer to qualitative or quantitative is never not quantitative. The answer is always better quantitative. And it's the same for earthquakes, climate change, like literally anything in life. Engineering, building bridges, building planes, building engines. You would be surprised, but all of this is actually based on Monte Carlo simulations, which has been around since 1946. So it's kind of part of day-to-day life. And I think the really alarming part of the conversation is that risk managers claim to be the center of excellence for uncertainty and volatility, and yet it sometimes feels that we're almost the last to the dinner, because maintenance engineers have been using Monte Carlo forever. Construction engineers have been using Monte Carlo forever. People in marketing use Monte Carlo. People in pricing use Monte Carlo forever. So I think that's where we really are. Either the podcast presenter is completely wrong, and in fact dangerously wrong, or she's just saying something a little bit more nuanced, which is basically just don't use normal distribution. I think that's the golden rule of risk management. Don't use normal distributions. And she's saying you have to be a little bit more thorough in your approach to risk modeling.
Cool. Quinn, I want to come to you and just pick up a little bit of the question that Bob just answered, but a bit that I don't think we quite addressed, which was, should risk management, when organizations are talking about using AI, and I'm not talking about using AI within the context of risk management now, I'm talking about using AI in other areas. When public-facing organizations are talking about using AI, do risk managers have enough of a seat at that table in terms of understanding the risks that might create, and what role should they be playing?
Good question. I think it's evolving, but I would think as a risk professional, your job is to assure that you're giving the right information, the right guidance to the organization for those tools to be utilized successfully in the organization. So that would be providing, a framework of guidance for the organization and an approval process to get those tools implemented and up and running in your organization. Controls around the data models, making sure that you're testing those up on an ongoing basis. I think that would be the first goal, right? And then from there is how do we take it beyond just traditional day-to-day managing standard models, but to Alex's point, making it even bigger is how do you get it to use out of the box thinking? How do you get it to be a little bit bigger? How do you get to stretch the data points that are coming through those AI models and those AI capabilities that you're installing? But I would focus on, I think the risk manager should focus on how do you get it up and running safely in your organization? How do you protect yourselves? And then how do you hold your employees to using it in a safe, ethical way, right? And then once we've got that under control, and I think that's what people are concerned about now, because once we get that into place, I think to Alex's point, then you can start to figure out what more data can we throw in there, what other aspects of information that we are collecting in this organization that would help us get better results. I understand the likelihood component of that, but what if you're throwing expected losses in there? What if you're throwing in, value of the risk or the value out of risk? What if you're throwing in, risk adjusted returns on certain things? There's all other kinds of values that we can put in these models to make that quantification better. So I agree with Alex on, there's things that we can continue to make it better utilizing those tools. But I would focus on making sure that we can use the tools first, and make sure that they work and they're compliant with how we protect our organization.
Bob, I want to shift gears slightly. So we've talked about the intersect of kind of business management, risk management, and technology when it comes to managing uncertainty and also to a degree, improving insurance buying processes, etc. I want to talk a little bit about opportunity and value creation. So what is the risk manager's role in identifying opportunities and creating value for businesses, and how can they use technology to improve that role or to achieve that role, I guess?
Yeah, I think that fundamentally, it's not all that much different, right? It's the flip side of uncertainty. It's for some reason the side that we as risk management professionals have elected not to go to for decades. But many of the same tools, many of the same skills, so on and so forth, that we use relative to downside risk. And Alex, I think you got it right much earlier in this webinar. Our role as risk management professionals, decision support. Traditionally, we've supported decisions relative to downside risk, and we've gone after things like mitigation and control and so on and so forth. So we can get from the inherent to the residual, and then we can decide whether we're comfortable there. But upside risk, right? Opportunistic risk, particularly as the pace of change evolves and seems to have picked up dramatically here. We've got to be more nimble. We've got to be more agile. And we've got to be, I think, as all of us mentioned at some point, we've got to be more forward thinking and forward focused, because with the pace of change changing, your history doesn't necessarily accurately predict your future anymore. The future may be radically different than your history. So I think for risk management professionals to begin to become or earn their way into the discussion relative to innovation, relative to opportunity, relative to opportunistic uncertainty. And that introduces concepts that some of us are far less familiar with. Well, what would happen if it went too well? What would happen if it went better than expected? What would happen if it was superior to what we thought it might be? We all smile when I say that. However, if you think about it, just basic business, right? So what if it performed better than we thought it would? However, as a result, our costs of inputs, our costs relative to logistics and supply increase drastically. Well, that might change the entire proposition. We've got to be skilled at introducing that as part of decision support. And I'd argue that that's how we might engage and enable ourselves to assist with enabling innovation. That's a frontier that I don't think we've sufficiently explored to date.
Quinn, same question, I think. How do risk managers spot opportunities? How do they help business leaders make decisions about opportunities? What is the role of technology in that? How does all of that kind of triumvirate come together around opportunity?
Yeah, I think it comes back to a lot of what Bob just said, becoming that value creator and ambassador in the organization. Some of the things that I've seen with technology over the past few decades is one, the digital transformation, how we're moving to more information and being able to process that information to create that value for our leadership so they can make a better strategic decision. I think having that forward-looking perspective that we've hit on several times really drives value for the leadership, drives value for the board. Is they already know what's happening. You've already told us that. Tell us what we don't know, and what can we do about that, and how can we create value out of that. One of the biggest things that I've seen technology, and more so the evolution of the risk officer, and I think Bob, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's the ability to communicate and influence the rest of an organization. I can't tell you how many meetings I've gone in the last 10 years, and it's the first time business leads have met each other in huge organizations, and we're all sitting at a table and they're walking around shaking, nice to meet you, Bob. Never had a conversation. And that's a chief litigation officer, that's a head of safety, and they haven't had that format to communicate. And I think that has a huge influence in Bob being that ambassador in an organization. And that's always exciting to see when you can see that type of collaboration coming together, because now you've broken down those walls or the silos that we always like to refer to of communication. And I think if we do that, that allows us to be a little bit more resilient. It allows us to be a little bit more open when Bob takes an analysis to that business head and goes, hey, here's how your business impacts my business. Here's how a risk impacts you, which trickles down to me. And here's the values that I can create to enhance your part of the organization. Technology is driving that. Bob, I'll let you correct this, but you didn't see that 15 years ago. Somebody ran a spreadsheet and they wrote an algorithm and, hey, Alex, look what I found out through the spreadsheet. It was hard to do that. The technology is allowing us to bring that information together and correlate it. And I'm seeing it more and more every day that the chief risk officers are embracing that transformation, leveraging that data, trusting that data. And that's the biggest thing is, do you trust your data? Are you putting good information in there so you can go and have those conversations? So, that's what I'm seeing from my seat.
Alex, what do you think? And I'm kind of hoping that you'll at least reference horizon scanning in your answer.
Interesting. So first I wanted to make an important point, and then of course I'll mention it. I wanted to make an important point that question comes from a risk management book. And it's not a criticism, it's just the reality of life. And I hope the listeners realize that there's more to risk profession than the risk management textbook. I'm kind of using it as a metaphorical example, the risk management book, because there is a decision science book, which has completely different words in it and has completely different tools, completely different methodologies, completely different ideas and principles. And that question about risk and opportunity, that comes from a risk management book. If you were to open a decision-making book or a decision science book, what you would discover is that every assumption, every input into a decision model is a range, it is a distribution. And that distribution does not differentiate between the negative scenarios and the upside scenarios. In my mind, this is why sometimes it's difficult for me to kind of get the message across to the risk professionals, because in my world, this risk and opportunity thing, it just doesn't exist because it's the same thing. For me, risk is a distribution. It has some negative scenarios, it has some positive scenarios. And I'm not exaggerating. Right now, I'm taking a business valuation, business model, our strategic model for a company, and I'm turning it from deterministic into a stochastic. So I'm replacing all the key assumptions with distributions, with different, discrete, continuous, different distributions, depending on what the nature of the uncertainty is. And the value of the company at the back of a probabilistic model, stochastic model, is higher. So the risk value is higher than the deterministic value without risks. Because, for example, there's a lot of upside in our price, and this upside is not shown, it's not included in the single value deterministic model. So for me, talking about upsides and opportunities is absolutely natural, because when you do risk analysis quantitatively, when you do it kind of properly from the decision science textbook, you immediately kind of show all this upside to every single assumption. Then the result is a distribution at the end, which shows 80% were positive, more positive than you anticipated, and 20% were negative, more negative than you anticipated. So that is, I think it's so crucial to kind of bring that back into the conversation, because everything in life, everything is a trade-off. There's upside, but this upside comes at the cost. There's downside, but we can spend some money to protect the downside, or we have to accept it. Like this conversation is so natural in the decision world and so foreign in the risk world still. So hopefully this will change. And one of the fun things that I do on weekends is I build those little AI models. My favorite AI model is a risk management joke generator. You can put in the name of your favorite comedian, and it will create a risk management joke, but like a proper decision-based risk management joke in the voice of your favorite comedian. And it's text, so in their spirit, not literally in their audio. But that's one spectrum of just having fun with risk management and decision making. On the other spectrum, I have tools like horizon scanning, where I've designed multiple agents to kind of go and research a company from different perspectives, trying to identify both risks and opportunities that the company may be exposed over the next 10, 20, 30 years. And you literally just type in the company name, and then one agent, the first agent, goes and kind of researches the company and builds up the business model, identifies who the suppliers are, who the competitors, what the legislative environment is, what are the countries of presence, just builds up some sort of like narrative about the company. And then 5 other agents then go and research risks and opportunities in each field. Highly, like, very deep technical, insightful stuff, something that you just can't come up with intuitively, and something that would normally take at least 2 to 3 weeks to do manually, because that's literally what some organizations are doing manually, and it takes 30 seconds in AI. So I think that's, we're on the verge of something fascinating, and I have similar models for our contracts, our projects, our decisions.
Cool. We just had an interesting question come in, but we have 2 minutes left, which is a shame in some respects, because I feel like we could keep going for another hour, but we won't. I'm going to come around to everyone and ask you to leave us with a very quick final thought. You've got about 30 seconds each, but I think what I would like you to focus on is, I think you've built a compelling idea of what the future model should be in terms of that relationship between risk and management and how technology plays into that. What I want is, what are the practical next steps in getting there? Like, okay, if you think that these things are the answers, if you think that, this is the way in which technology should work, and that this is the way that risk management should work, what are the immediate next steps, and how do we get there? And I'm going to come to Bob. Nodded, so I'm going to come to Bob first.
Well, I can be pretty quick. I think there are probably two things that come to mind. One, whether it's the traditional manner, which revolves around interpersonal relationships, or whether you're Alex and you can invoke technology, in both respects. I think the lesson for today is risk management is and remains a team sport. If you're relying solely on your risk manager, their capabilities, their expertise, so on and so forth, then you are woefully short in terms of the understanding and the conclusions. And maybe we're all a victim of that historically. You heard Alex talk about AI and his prompts. Alex is bringing an army to answering the question. That army just happens to be an intangible army, but he's gaining input from well beyond himself. So I think in either case, if you're more a traditional practitioner, or if you understand and have embraced technology, it is about bringing the inputs together so that you can understand the perspectives, so that you can understand the reasonable ranges, and so that you can create quality decision support for your organization.
Lovely, Quinn.
I don't think I can say it any better than that, but I would put the bow on that, and that would be back to my statement of being the value creator, right? Bringing something to the table, and that's, I think, what Bob was talking about, regardless of your traditional or if you're forward thinking, bringing the ability to communicate and influence the rest of your organization is critical. You can't just throw it on a heat map anymore. There's got to be value in it. You've got to extract it, and you've got to be able to communicate it to the organization. And I think that starts with everything. Communication is everything in risk management. And so that's where I focus on going forward.
Alex, finish us off.
Use AI to upskill yourself, your teams, and then use that to generate outputs that you couldn't in the past. And my only caveat on that is don't use public LLMs for risk management, because all the answers they're going to give you are from the risk management book, which kind of means that they're wrong. So you want to use like some fine-tuned, pre-trained chatbots specifically designed for risk-based decision making.
Lovely. Thank you all, and thank you everybody for joining. Thank you for everybody who asked questions and who submitted them in advance. I'm sorry I didn't get to quite all of them. And most of all, thank you to our panelists, who I think have been excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.